Welcome into a football show. My name is Zach Lyons. You can follow me on Twitter at FWordsPod. He's Easton Freeze. You can follow him on Twitter at Easton Freeze. And you may see no overhead lights at this Atlanta Spring Hill Suites near the airport. The air conditioning is suspect, but I just landed in Atlanta to record this episode. And that's right, we're recording this episode the night before this actually posts. But don't worry, we have actually good discussion that does not require the Tennessee Titans to do anything. Because guess what? The media is not going to be available for Tennessee Titans on Thursday. So we decided to record it earlier because Easton has a child named Valerie. And we are, just shifting schedules around for everybody to accommodate family. So if you see me,
I'm drinking coffee at 7 in the evening because that's about all it's going to take to keep me up longer than this. So things are just weird. Time is a construct of your mind. It
is. And especially after being delayed twice, just try to get from Nashville to Atlanta. Like, I don't understand this delay thing. A lot of weird things that happened, but at the end of the day, Macy was a superb flight attendant, Easton.
Macy?
So before we lifted off, she was taking beverage orders and stuff. And, I ordered a beer, of course. And she goes, well, would you want one beer or two beers? And I go, well, if you're only coming by once, and this is the only time I'm going to see you, I'll take two beers. And that takes a special kind of person to recognize that maybe I'm a functioning alcoholic and need two beers.
Did she profile you? How does it make you feel to be profiled by the stewardess? That's
I got two beers.
I think it's good bartending.
Yeah, I got two. Sure. It's great bartending. Speaking of bartending, alcohol and beers, Sinker's Beverages over in East Nashville it's a premier, award-winning liquor store that can give you the beer that you need, the beer that you're looking for, and the beer you may not even know that you want. Because the experts over at Sinker's Beverages will find you whatever you need. Tailor your basket, your little grocery cart for liquor to your taste. And that is Sinker's Beverages, award-winning liquor store over in East Nashville. They just revamped their parking lot to make it easier for you to go get your alcohol. But you need to be sober to get there and drive. You need to be sober and get there and back. And if you're not sober and you need some alcohol, go to Uber Eats and look at Sinker's Beverages and order whatever you need. Because
Zach, they drive so you can drink.
Yeah, a little slow, but hey, we'll take it. Better than the last time where you just completely ignored
didn't do
the
it.
setup.
Yeah, we're improving. That's what matters.
Yeah. Speaking of improving, Tennessee Titans training camp is, in full swing. Easton, you've been there for a select number of practices, considering that you are a father and stuff. But
it's important to be clear and honest about that, about when we are and aren't there, who is and isn't there.
You don't want to write an article acting like that you were there. And listen, I used to rag on PK for doing that stuff about tweets about game day when,
Oh, me too, but I get it now. I do. I really get it.
I kind of get it. Because the article writing is a little ridiculous and people are trying to write and make assessments on practice videos. And so, it's a little tricky. It's a little tricky situation, a little dicey.
You don't have to be there to cover the team. Just don't make it sound like you were. It's the dishonesty that bothers me. It's not that I'm like, oh, you have to be there or else you got to shut up about the team. No, don't don't write like it sounds like you were there. You're misleading people. That's not fair.
Yeah. And this is not targeted at any one person. There's many people that are doing this.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, technically, we have to, me, Mike, and Stoney have to break down the film or break down what we hear, but we're crediting the people that told us this.
Exactly. That's all we're asking for.
So you've been there for a select number of practices, but you also have trusted confidant, JT, godfather to your child, to Valerie?
Hell no. Absolutely not.
Okay, no. Yeah, I wouldn't either. I was going to actually say that call the Child Protection Services.
Well, yeah, no, before she was born, I told him he would meet her when he got a high school graduation invite in the mail. That's when he got to see her for the first time. We may back that up a little bit, but so far that's still the plan. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't blame you. But he's been there. He's been providing great coverage at JT Runke on Twitter. That's RUHNKE.
Yep. RUHNKE. That's the one.
The worst last name ever.
There are so many worse last names. There really are. This is a bad take.
Is it Ronk? Like JT Ronk?
He didn't choose it, okay? It's not like he went down to the DMV and decided this is what I'm going with.
Just saying.
Take that with his parents.
Terrible last name. Maybe, Go back in time.
Your last name is a
change it with
word
your
that's
ancestors.
spelled differently than the way people say it. So I don't know what
It's
you're
actually
talking about.
French for lions. It's Lyons. It's actually pronounced Lyons.
It doesn't make any sense. So that's like
But
your name is metric, and it's like that's not what we do around here. So
yeah, I still bleed USA. It's easily pronounced. Nobody has to second guess what it actually says. They all know what it says. But
people ask me how do you spell your last name? I'm like, the way you spell the word. Just spell the word. It's not hard.
Yeah, it's not hard.
Freeze or with an S or an I. It's just freeze.
Yeah, it's not like a lettuce or anything.
No.
We wanted to start off the show talking a little bit. We kind of wanted to talk Jeffery Simmons adjacent, because obviously the Jeffery Simmons stuff is still kind of a big topic, even though it's dying out as the day goes on, because Jeffery Simmons apologized. He took accountability, sort of didn't take accountability, but he took accountability. And forgive and forget, right? That's the big motto here. Maybe not forgive, but don't forget, because this may come up again, because it's come up several times in life.
More like, let's just move on. Yeah,
I'm with you. But it did spark a different kind of conversation. So actually, too. So on Football and Other F Words, we talked about the coach's approach to discipline and handling stuff compared to the prior regime. And I thought that was a different, interesting take that didn't require any pro clutching on either side of the Jeffery Simmons versus Buck Rising thing. And then I'm in the airplane, and I'm kind of thinking, listen to some music, listen to some Beastie Boys, and I'm kind of thinking, what's a different topic that still relates to this topic that would still be topical? And the concept of leadership comes up. And Easton, I don't know how many episodes or which episodes you've listened to, but there was when the Ryan Tannehill was like, I'm not, Malik Willis's mentor, or whatever he said.
Portable mentor, Ryan Tannehill. Yep.
Yeah. I had that one drove me up the wall. That discussion drove me up the wall online, because I'm not a mentor or anything, but I do understand there's a distinct difference between mentorship and leadership. And I went into this big tirade about it, talking about it, because leadership's a big deal for me. It's something that you don't major in or anything, but something that I've kind of been thrusted to in various situations growing up, into my adult life and stuff like that. So leadership is something that I've always valued, but I also understand that the definition of leadership in 2003 and 2004 is a lot different than the definition of leadership or perception of what is a leader in 2024. I mean, we're talking about 20 years since I've been fucking in college, which is insane.
Same.
So I kind of look at it in, you're 24, maybe you're 25.
I am 24.
But you're right there.
I will be 25 later this year. Yep.
I am 15 years older than you, so there is a big age divide. Whether are you Gen Z or are you millennial?
I am Gen Z.
Okay, so there is a generation.
I'm among the oldest Gen Zs. Yeah.
And I'm apparently the youngest millennial. And I hate fucking being a millennial, or the oldest millennial, I think. And I fucking hate being a millennial. I hate that term. I don't associate with millennials. I
don't associate with Gen Z. So I guess we're in the same boat.
There you go.
Yeah.
So we're one generation above.
Right.
So I wanted to have this discussion with you because of the generation gap, because of the age gap. And I do think that we have differing outlooks on life, where we can have a good, honest conversation.
Okay.
And I think there's this misperception that the Tennessee Titans don't have leadership.
Right.
But I think that stems from the Tennessee Titans not having tenured Titans. And I think there is a distinct difference. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So this is a pretty natural conversation, I think, that is born of the Jeffery Simmons situation. I know it's one that, not to, out anybody, but it's something that came up behind the scenes at the Titans facility surrounding all of that, and kind of has been a conversation for the past couple of weeks, because that is a natural, I think for those of us that are writing stories this time of year, that's a natural place to go, is like, who's going to be the person that takes the mantle for this team? And like you mentioned, you go right to, okay, who's been around the longest? And you realize it's a really short list of mildly tenured guys. It's like, okay, Harold Landry's been around for a long time. And Amani Hooker's been around for a handful of years, and the list gets really slim. So I think it's important to note, and this is where you're going to eventually go with this, I think, is that leadership on a football team is not inherently born of how long you've been with the given franchise. It is also an element of how long you've been doing the thing, wherever in the league that may be. And so as you're about to list, and I won't steal your thunder here, there are a number of veteran players on this team, which shouldn't shock anybody. Like, we've been talking for months now about how this team is really old at some spots, and that can be both a positive and a negative because there's a lot of experience, but there's some injury concern. There's some wear and tear concern. They've got older players. It's kind of a really old or really young roster in a way. And if you want to kind of list those guys off, my general point is I think people are halfway there when they say this team is lacking leadership. They are mistaking the fact that they don't know who the leaders necessarily are with the idea that there is none. I think it's unfair to say there is none. I think the point that you're trying to make, and you're almost there when people think this, is we don't quite know who the vocal leaders are going to be this year because it's so new.
And I think the vocal is a key word too, because I think that people often mistake loudest for leadership. And that's something that I harped on with the Ryan Tannehill thing. Like, he's not a very loud guy, but he's a leader. He may not be a mentor, but he's a leader. And Derrick Henry, and I wrote
not
about this. Not like a loud guy. And I wrote about this at stackinginbox.com, is like, he wasn't a leader verbally or vocally, even though everybody considers him this great leader. He was a leader by action. And there are many ways to lead, but he was not the raw, get him up guy. You could look at the Miami game as a stark difference between him and Tyjae Spears in that manner. Does not mean Tyjae Spears is a leader or a great leader or anything. He's on the right track maybe, but it does project the difference in how leadership is perceived. And it's like, with this fan base, if you're great at your job, you are a great leader. But that is not necessarily the case.
No,
and I think Jeffery Simmons is kind of proving that.
This is where
in real time.
Yep.
Great at his job, takes it very seriously. It doesn't really, it's not to say that he's a bad leader. He doesn't know how to be the leader. And that's okay, in my opinion. He doesn't need to be the leader, because if you look at the list of guys, you have Cheeto, L'Jarius Sneed, Harold Landry, Amani Hooker, Jeffery Simmons included, DeAndre Hopkins, Lloyd Cushenberry, and Tony Pollard, who got lauded for his leadership by Dallas last year. And those are just, I'm probably even forgetting some guys, maybe some starters, but I don't think I am. But that is a list of 8 people that are various leaders at various positions with various leadership styles. So I don't necessarily think there is a leadership problem with the Tennessee Titans. I just think that maybe I'm throwing myself in your younger generation. I just think that maybe there's a different leadership style than what the old heads are used to. And I think that people view Derrick Henry and I think Kevin Byard was a leader, and he was a strong leader, but he wasn't really, he was a talkative guy. He stood out and took his lumps, or he stood out and held people accountable, but he wasn't a raw guy. Like, Jeffery Simmons has been the raw guy. Before him, it was really Jarrell Casey, right? Like, in the huddles. When you're talking about who's breaking down the huddles, it went from like Jarrell Casey to Jeffery Simmons. And maybe that's just a Mike Vrabel thing, or maybe that's a run first head coach thing. But for whatever reason, it went from them two right there. Those are your raw guys. And I think people think the raw is leadership, when really it's like DeAndre Hopkins making sure that Treylon Burks comes and hangs out with them, or DeAndre Hopkins is even having Tavondre Sweat over. It's, stuff like that is also true leadership that goes unnoticed. And so I'm going to kind of venture out and have a hot take that maybe Jeffery Simmons is not the leader that everybody wants him to be, but he could still be the leader that this team needs. But I do think that this I do think that there is leadership on this team. It's just that everybody's looking in all the wrong places for it.
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, while you were saying that, a very tenuous, probably foolish comparison came into my mind. I'm going to say it anyways. This is such a stupid thing to say because it's a very flawed comparison, but I think at the heart of it, it's right. You're talking about the leadership style of Kevin Byard as compared to a guy like Jeffery Simmons. And with Byard, it was so buttoned up. If you think about it from a political standpoint, it was very, Byard was very Obama. Like, it was very much a guy that, like, they had an energy and a weight to them. You'd hang on every word. It was very buttoned up and professional. And there was just an energy that they brought that was the kind of thing that you want to follow. So, like, you hear that person, you want to follow them, you trust them. With Jeffery Simmons, it's kind, and this is where it's very stupid. It's kind of Donald Trump in the sense that, and the politics take that out of it, the actual political beliefs, but the way that it's like Trump, not the most buttoned up guy, says some things that, to the media, you're like raising an eyebrow at, but man, does he get folks fired up. And when he is, the person leading his base, the people that he actually is working with, they will go to war with him. They'll run through a wall for him. He's got a different kind of chaotic good energy. And that's where it's a very tenuous comparison, but like, they're different leadership styles. And to your point, I think the biggest thing, I don't think it's that the older generation is missing the new leadership style as much as it is. Again, they just don't, like, in the past couple of years, we have lost, those of us in the media have lost the people in the locker room that were go-to folks to talk about in terms of
probably good interviews, right? Like, when you say
number
that's
one,
really
good interviews. Yes. I mean, Kevin Byard was for a long time considered the best
interview
on the team.
By your own admissions, not a great interview.
He's a great guy. This is no slight to Amani Hooker.
Right.
He's got the team speak thing down to a T. He is, to his own benefit, very boring at the podium. And that's I think a good thing from his perspective. For us, it's just not a great quote sometimes. But we would go into the locker room the past couple of years, and we could go to Kevin Byard, you go to Derrick Henry, you go to Ryan Tannehill. Like, there were these pillars of the team at different positions on the team that were for lack of a better term, the guys that you could trust to speak on a level of accountability for not just them, but for their unit and maybe for their side of the ball. And they could shoulder some of the blame when need be. They could, sort of be mini coaches in a way, the way that they would address the media and handle doling out responsibility in a responsible way to the media. So you don't have those guys around anymore. And again, I'm not really all that concerned about those roles being taken. Like, there are going to be folks that take that mantle. This is a really new team. You mentioned all these guys that are tenured NFL veterans. It's going to emerge. Like, in the next 4 weeks, we're going to have a better idea of who is the speaker for these different position groups. We just haven't gotten there yet. That takes some time. And I think it takes time for not just for us to figure it out, but for the team to kind of figure out, like, who do we turn to? These are a bunch of guys that are still learning each other's names, still learning, their routines and how they interact with each other in the workplace. It's a lot of new co-employees. They're trying to figure all that out. So that's important as well. And the last thing that I was going to say, if I can remember it off the top of my head, to your big point here about how Jeffery Simmons may or may not be the leader that Titans fans want him to be, or maybe more importantly, that the Titans organization wants him to be. You mentioned how one of the most common leaderships, like the common delineation between leaders, is folks that are leaders by the way by the things that they say, and leaders by the way that they act, leading by example. And I think you can further break down leading by example into two categories. They're the kind of folks that are like, who's a good example of this? I'm going to throw that, I'll throw out Nick Westbrook-Akine, where are they the best player on the field on Sundays? No. But are they somebody that is first in, last out? Are they somebody that is a stalwart NFL veteran? They know the ins and outs of the program. They are doing everything right, from the way that they interact with the media, to the way they interact with their teammates, to the way they interact with their coaches, how they're taking notes in the meeting room, how they know the ins and outs of the scheme. Like, all of that, that's the behavior where they're picking up after their teammates. They're making sure the trash isn't left around in the locker room floor. Classic leadership stuff, where that's leading by example from Monday to Saturday. And then there are people who kind of get thrust into leadership positions because they are leaders by example. And that example is, on Sundays, you're the best player. And so people turn to you naturally. Your teammates turn to you because you kind of carry the team in the actual games. The media turns to you because you carry the wins and loss column for your team, and you're the most interesting person that fans want to hear from. And so you kind of get pushed in that position. And you see that relatively often in the NFL, where guys that may or may not be cut from that leadership cloth are thrust into that leadership position because they're really good. And with Jeffery Simmons, we've seen that partially as a product of him being a very, very good player and deserving of that praise, and partially because, again, the folks around him that were the previously installed leaders have now departed. And I think we may be the only show that is like not, pussyfooting around the idea of, I'm not sure Jeffery Simmons is that leader. And when I say I'm not sure, I don't want Jeffery Simmons or his acolytes to be like, Easton Freeze thinks Jeffery Simmons is not a leader. No, I mean, I am not sure. I do not know. Like, I need to see more. There have been examples like today. I said on Twitter, 10 out of 10 response from Jeffery Simmons. I thought he did a fantastic job of responding to what happened yesterday and kind of quashing that story. The statement that he made, whether he crafted it on his own or with PR, with some teammates that was in his ear or his coaches, whoever it was, that statement was the kind of thing you hear from a leader of your team. And if that's the kind of guy he's going to be throughout the season, then I think he can be that leader. But then there are days like yesterday where you're throwing the first punch at padded practice in training camp. And, as our friend Paul Kaharski pointed out in his column yesterday, what kind of example for the self-proclaimed and proclaimed by your GM leader of the team and leader of the defense is that to a guy like T'Vondre Sweat, who we all know needs a leader in his ear, somebody to mentor him along the way? What kind of message is it to say, hey, T'Vondre, this is how we handle these things. We're going to swing on our teammates at practice and then throw around the P word at radio hosts on kids camp day while they're all waiting to get your autograph while the radio host is on the air on local radio. Those two things, that's two very different people. I just don't know which one he's going to be.
Well, and I also think that you can still be a leader and make mistakes. And I think that's kind of where and I'm not saying this is from you, but I do think there are people that kind of lose sight of that. Is that a leader doing what he did is not great. First off, you should be level-headed. You shouldn't go into the locker room, see some stuff, then come out, look for Buck, accidentally get one of his co-workers thrown under the bus for pointing you towards Buck, and then go into the deranged rant on live air and say stuff in like 10 seconds that totally contradicts itself.
Right.
But that is a teachable moment, right? And leaders should always be learning their own limits, learning what they should and should not be doing. And you can make the argument that, okay, he should know. But this isn't just about, and I think where people get lost, Easton,
I'm surprised
isn't just about the tweet.
I'm surprised hearing this from you.
Oh, really?
Basically, your point here is that we should extend grace to people. And more than once I have suggested in our friend group, we should extend some grace. And you say, fuck grace. We're not extending grace to people. But I think this is a reasonable take by you that here's the ultimate point. Is
maybe it's the alcohol, the 2 beers that Macy gave me on the airplane, and the 3 beers I had before I got on the airplane. I'm just feeling like, and maybe it's the heat. Maybe I got heat exhaustion in this room. But I kind of look at it and I go, he's still what, 28, 29?
Yeah.
That's still relatively young. I mean, I'm sure you fly off the handle and say stuff that you later have to regret to your wife. And you're about to have a kid, and guess what? That's probably going to happen when you have a kid. There's stuff that happens like that. And look, we should be in there, and I get that it's easy to say, well, he went inside and he did this, and then he saw it, that he came out and yelled at Buck. He yelled at Buck in front of a bunch of kids, and he looked deranged. Apparently the video, if you're looking at him, if you had a point of view video, it looks way worse.
That's what I've heard.
And I get it. He should not have done it. It was also fucking hot. His emotions were running high. And this is not just about that tweet. I know people want to say that it's just about the tweet, but it is about other stuff that Buck has said. Reasonable analytic stuff that wasn't personal that he said.
Just critiques.
And I will say this, that Buck's tweet was very dramatic. It was sloppy and all this stuff. A little dramatic.
Mind the tweet at all. I didn't mind it.
To me, it was hyperbole.
Well, being there,
I will say this. It took me
not being there, because sitting there, because I saw his tweet in the moment when it happened. And based on what I had just seen, I felt like that tweet was fair and honest brokering. Like genuinely, it was a very sloppy, bad look from him and from a lot of his teammates to start the practice.
I'm glad you said that word because I want to ask you a question. Where in the moment, did you read sloppy period Simmons, or did you read it as sloppy Simmons?
I don't know if I can honestly.
If you were Jeffery Simmons coming in hot, what do you think it said?
So are you saying
because I thought it said sloppy Simmons?
Oh, like a Trumpian nickname of like sloppy Simmons over here. This sloppy Simmons.
Because it said sloppy capital letters period. So it was just and so like I didn't know.
No, I didn't read it that way. I read it as this was sloppy play, sloppy behavior by Jeffery Simmons, not a nickname.
I thought he said sloppy Simmons, so I could see why that maybe probably pushed Jeffery Simmons over the edge.
Yeah, that's totally different.
Because I thought that's what it said, and I thought he was calling him sloppy Simmons. And look, again, still does not warrant the reaction that Jeffery Simmons gave him. But Jeffery Simmons is a human, a hot-headed human that just came through and did all. But it also dates back to stuff that he said around that Buck said around the Jamal Adams time. Mm-hmm. And I think today I got it. Maybe this is what has tempered me a little bit and maybe shown some grace, is that Chris Sanders was on a show, and he was on Stillman's show. And he was trying to explain to Stillman, who Stillman did not want to listen, just wanted to continue to talk and argue over.
Really?
About, I know. Big surprise. The usage of the word soft when describing another man, a grown-ass man. And
who took issue with that? Stillman took issue with that?
Chris Sanders thinks, Chris Sanders was trying to explain the outlook from a player that is called soft by another man, not to his face. And he asked Stillman, would you call Jeffery, if you're in an alleyway and you're talking to Simmons and would you call him soft? Now Stillman of course said yes.
And
maybe he will, but he'll be on the ground if he does.
That. He means that.
And I think that is the main issue that maybe we're all missing, that it was kind of a light bulb moment for me, is that, I knew it wasn't just a tweet. I knew that it was stuff that Bucket said on the radio about Jamal Adams, which again, reasonable stuff to say.
Stuff we all said. It wasn't just Jeffery Simmons. We all said these things. Yeah.
It was about Jeffery Simmons not living up to his contract so far. Mm-hmm. A reasonable thing to say. Yep. But Chris Sanders kind of like narrowed that point of view to me, is that it was about soft. Now, getting back to leadership, I understand he went and manned up later, whether by cajoling of Ryan Carthon, who he talked to on the field after the incident, or PR staff. Either way, he still manned up and did that. I would bet, Easton, that if yesterday didn't happen, Simmons probably wouldn't have been available for the media today. No. So I would say that, again, he had to step up. Doesn't matter who told him to. He could have been of his own volition. Yep. He still stepped up and took ownership. That is still, and you said this, that is still 10 out of 10. Mm-hmm. And that's good leadership that, again, Tavondre Sweat can learn from. Now he knows not what to do, what not to do, right? Like Tavondre Sweat knows what not to do. And I do think that Jeffery Simmons has quality leadership styles. It just may not be the leadership that everybody thinks that this team needs. And at the end of the day, what we really need to see out of the Tennessee Titans leadership is this next generation. Because this is not a team built for Super Bowls in this year, next year, right out of the gate. This isn't a tenured veteran team. This is a team that needs Will Levis to be good, but Will Levis to be a leader. And he's already started showing the leadership qualities. It needs Tyjae Spears to learn from Tony Pollard, who is a leader, but also be his own leader and be that vocal, rah guy that everybody loves, that we saw in Miami day in and day out. It's up to a younger guy like Kenneth Murray. It's up to Cedric Gray. It's up to Roger McCreary. It's up to these younger guys to become the leaders that everybody is wanting from the Tennessee Titans. The next Kevin Byard comes from that generation. And it does not take long for those guys to show up and be those leaders. In fact, I would even venture to say that Roger McCreary pretty good leadership by not jumping in and just sitting there and being quiet.
He's my favorite part of that
his
video.
Teammate.
He's my favorite part of that video. I've never seen a man not want to be where he is more than Roger McCreary in the moment. He wanted to just teleport far away. It was amazing. Yeah.
But I do think this team has veteran presence, and it has the young guns that can turn into the leadership that people desperately crave and view in a box. Like, I feel like people view leadership like this. It's their style, their preferred method. And of course, probably should put it up at the eye and not in the mouth.
By the way, yeah, that's too late for you.
But
I'm afraid.
I think people need to understand that leadership is not just in a small circle; it is a big circle, or with many little circles in it that overlap.
Big tent leadership. Yeah. So a couple of things. One, to your last point there about concern that anybody's going to step up. Again, I see a ton of leadership potential on this team, both young and old. And you mentioned some younger guys that you think, like, I think Josh Wiley has really come out of this show in a way where I would not be surprised in the slightest. And we're hearing things. I think this was today because I didn't see any of this, but we hear that him and Kenneth Murray really getting into it. Kenneth Murray loudly critiquing his route running today, and those two going at it over the middle of the field. Like, if he becomes a vocal leader, I will not be surprised. Tyjae Spears, I think, is well on his way to being that kind of guy. On the defensive side of the ball, I think Roger McCreary is on his way to do that. I could see a guy like Jarvis Brownlee being that. Like, there are guys that can become that. I'm not concerned. You mentioned what leaders do and don't do. That's my big point here. And again, if Jeffery Simmons is for some reason listening to this, or people that are
defenders. And first off, if Jeffery Simmons is listening to this 32 minutes in, get a life.
Well, I don't think get a life is strong, because there are other folks that are listening that have lives. I just think there's more important things for Jeffery Simmons to be doing during training camp than listening to this.
Yes,
but my point is we've critiqued Jeffery Simmons. We've questioned whether or not he can or can't be a leader. The bottom line for me today is there are two types of leaders in this world, right? There are leaders who make big mistakes and really mess up sometimes, and there are leaders that lie to you. Like, because they're not being truthful about whether or not they are infallible. The greatest leaders to ever walk the planet had really bad days and really bad moments. And what differentiates the good ones from the bad ones is that the good ones will have days like Jeffery Simmons had yesterday, and they will respond with days like he had today, where you come out and you take ownership, you address it, you quash the story. That's what leadership is. Not being perfect. That's not what leadership looks like. Leadership looks like making those kinds of mistakes, having a bad moment, and not doing it again, learning from it. So like, if this all happens again a week from now, and then he apologizes again, it won't, it's not going to carry weight, because it's like, we just saw you do this. Don't make that big mistake again. But assuming he has, learned from this and is taking culpability, and what he said today means something, which I think it does. That's what leadership looks like. It's responding. It's saying, I'm gonna be better. This team needs me to be better. I will be better. I'm pledging to be better. I'm sorry for what happened. We're gonna move on. We're on to Cincinnati in that way. So that's an important point, I think. And then you mentioned the calling a man soft to his face versus not to his face. I think one of the things that was most confused by folks in the discourse around this the past 48 hours is the idea that I had a number of media or people responding to me saying, well, I think this was a wake-up call for the media, that they can't just say things and expect to get any response back. First of all, none of us think that, whether you're there, whether you're not. Like, nobody is well, nice. Anybody worth
the
their
majority.
Salt, anybody worth their salt in the media, whether they are at Titan's facility or just online, is expecting to be able to say whatever they want without any repercussions, without any kind of response from the people they're talking about. That's not true. And as to the idea, I had some people saying, like, well, media folks at practice, they don't want to actually say these things to the players, but they don't want to talk about it with the players. We want nothing more than to talk about it. I promise you, we would prefer to say everything we say to and with the players and have that discussion with them. If we could talk to the players all the time, we would. Like, we'd have them on the shows. We'd do everything with the players. I promise. That's not, nobody's running from the players or the coaches. That's not an issue here. But I think the people are misunderstanding that the issue we had with what Jeffery Simmons did yesterday is that he came to Buck about it and said something, is that he responded. It's like, well, you're mad that the guy responded? He has to just sit there and take the criticism? That's not the point. It's the way that he did it. Obviously, I think that this is not a hard thing, but apparently it is, because we're having to really spell it out for folks. If he had done things differently, if he had gone, even on the air live, he'd gone over to Buck and been like, hey man, I don't like what you said. Let's talk about this later. Or, hey man, I'm gonna sit down right now. Sorry, Roger. Let's talk about this on the air. I don't think it would have been that big a deal. If he hadn't yelled and screamed about it and used profanity in front of, again, the kids' day at the Titans facility, like the kids' camp day, there were a bunch of very small children around waiting for autographs from Jeffery Simmons. He comes over like a raging bull, yelling profanities at the live radio. Not a great look. Like it was the way that he handled it that was inappropriate, not the fact that he was responding. And I think as Buck laid out pretty clearly, they're in the moment. It's not that I'm mad at you for, saying something to me. I'd love for us to talk about this, and I'm not afraid to say it to your face. Let's just handle this like adults and do this the right way and not the way that it was done.
Yeah. Hey, he had plenty of opportunities to get on the radio and talk to Buck. Right.
It sounds like he was
invited
to be on the radio and said he didn't want to be. Yeah. So,
yeah. So, and the stuff that he said on the morning show 104.5 is fine for strictly Jamal Adams, but it doesn't really get to the heart of what was really going on.
Right.
And that was like July 15th. So that was a long time ago. But I want to talk about some interviews that the head coach, the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator all had. And we're going to close out the show with this because it's going to be a long. We kind of split it up into two topics.
Two big topics.
I think all three of them said something kind of ridiculous. And
all three of them being the head coach.
Hey, listen, it was bound to happen. Yeah. Yeah, it's bound to happen that all three of them said something ridiculous. It just happened to happen in the same 24 hours.
It's that time of year, baby. It's the stupid soundbite season. Yeah.
But we'll start with Brian Callahan, because Callahan, and this is from you, Callahan in his response to, and you said this on the Hot Read podcast as well, so people go check that out on 440 Sports and Broadway Sports YouTube pages. Callahan, in his response to me about offensive timing, when he mentioned, for whatever reason around here, the bad things get magnified quite a bit. And we both agree that's a pretty dumb thing to say out loud.
Yeah.
But I think we disagree. That's just the nature. And then maybe you don't disagree, so I don't want to put these words in your mouth. But to me, all fan bases, all sports, of all teams, all media, negative stuff sells. And I don't know how about your podcast listens or anything, but when the Tennessee Titans are coming off a loss, people look for that cathartic release. But for whatever reason right now, maybe social media culture or whatever, it's the negative stuff is what people focus on, but that's not Tennessee specific.
No. I think I hear this all the time, and I sort of agree. I think it's half right. I think in reality, the extremes sell. And so supremely happy and supremely mad, both so you mentioned coming off a loss, the numbers go up. That's true for me. And as well as it is for you, I see our numbers, they go up after a loss. But when it's the fifth loss in a row, people are like, they're just sick to they don't want to listen. They're sick to their stomachs. That's not good. You don't want too much of one thing or the other. When the Titans fire Mike Vrabel, that's a big negative topic. That random Carthon press conference like that sold. What also sold as well, if not more, was a month later, hey, they hire Brian Callahan, a really exciting hire. We're happy about the hire. Let's all be excited about the future of this Tennessee Titans team. That also sold. And during the spring, we had a lot. So the reason why I think this is dumb, and I pointed out, like you said, on the Hot Read podcast yesterday, and I was talking to you guys about it in the chat today. And again, I'm sort of surprised it wasn't a big talking point after yesterday's practice, but I'm also not, because in the grand scheme of things, it was like the sixth most interesting thing that happened at practice.
It got kind of overshadowed by a few things.
Super overshadowed, which, by the way, I know our friend Paul Caharsey, he's never going to say it, but I know he was so smug when he drops that article in the middle of practice yesterday about Arden Key's suspension. And he slinked off somewhere to publish that right in the middle of practice. We all see it. And we're like, that son of a gun. He's going to just drop this right in the middle of practice. He's going to be the story. He comes back, very satisfied look on his face. Like, yeah, I had that yesterday. Just was waiting to publish it. He was very happy. And then all of that happened about Jeffery Simmons. I know he was at least a little bit upset that wasn't the story coming out of the day. So with this comment from Callahan, it's not just, it's dumb. It's dumb twofold, because it is one, a really, I'll say it to your face, Brian. I think it's a very soft mentality, because as you pointed out, this is not a Titan specific thing that negativity sells. That's just the way that life is.
Do you think you could take Brian Callahan if it came down to it in an alley?
I think it wouldn't be a super lopsided fight, but he might be able to beat me up. I don't know. I don't know how
tall he is in person. So it's not like
Vrabel, where I know I would die. So it's it's who wants it more, I think, kind of thing.
Right.
But he's definitely taller than me because I'm just not that tall of a guy. But the other thing is it's a soft mentality as well as just demonstrably untrue, because I know that in the Brian Callahan tenure for the Tennessee Titans, aside from, by my count, 2 signings during the spring that people were mildly opposed to, not like outrage, like how dare they make the decision, but be just kind of like head scratchers. Aside from those 2 things, and then the Jeffery Simmons draft where it was very split, some people very happy, but some people very upset. It's been nothing but unicorns and roses and sunshine and rainbows for the Brian Cat. Like we point. I know you did. I know we did. I know everybody in town did. Like an episode that was literally about how the vibes are super high. Man, the vibes with this Tennessee Titans team are sky high. Things are great. All spring, they've been great. I can't believe how excited everybody is and how happy everybody is this spring during OTAs. That's how positive all of the coverage was. And it wasn't until like 10 seconds ago, besides, again, that I think the one thing you can point to is the Tavondre Sweat dissenters when that draft decision was made. Aside from that, it wasn't until like 10 seconds ago that they got a little bit of pushback on things, and you had a couple of things go wrong, and you had one day at practice like yesterday where it's largely negative news. And so,
do you think he talked to Vrabel? Maybe it's coming from Vrabel or Rand Carthon, like the
like in the past. You mean
fruit of the poisonous tree? I guess am I using that right?
I see. He's kind of future tripping a little bit when it comes to the negativity, because like for him to respond to the first real negativity in the presses that way was discouraging to me. It was, and I think it was Stoney that pointed out to him. It kind of read like a guy that was fed up with the way that practice had gone, knew that the Arden Key story had broke, and had to deal with fighting at practice. He's an offensive guy. The offense had a tough day against the defense. Just a number of minor stressors in his life where he was just, you're on the job some days and you're just not in the mood. And so sometimes in the moment, you're a little frustrated and it's blown out of proportion in your mind, like everything's going bad, and you step away and a couple hours later, like, we're fine, everything's fine. But in the moment, you don't quite realize that. It kind of sounded like maybe a guy who was just a little fed up with the day that he was having. And if that's the case, and that's why he kind of just threw in, because again, that comment had nothing to do with the nature of my question. He just kind of threw it in there in the middle of him answering the actual question. He may have just kind of tossed that in there to blow off some steam.
Frame the actual question real quick.
The actual question was, hey, Brian, in the spring, you were vocal about the importance of timing for your offense and the quarterback and all of the skill players to be on time in order for your offense to succeed. And I kind of alluded to how so far this summer in training camp, we've seen some lackluster timing, some plays that have been a little, some decisions that were made a tick late, some routes that broke a tick late. The timing hasn't quite been there. So how are you emphasizing that timing to your players, and how important is it that you guys nail down that timing? And is that kind of a byproduct of everybody still learning and thinking a little bit too much out there? That was the nature of the question. And then he threw in, by the way, negative things get blown out of proportion, which I hope he didn't take my question to be alluding to the fact that your offense stinks and is slow. Like that wasn't the way I presented it. It's not what I meant. So I hope that's not the way that he took it. I don't know why he threw that in there, but it was, if that is a harbinger of what is to come from him in terms of the way that he responds to any kind of media pushback or negativity in the presses, it's discouraging. That's bad. And I think the wrong way to go about being a head coach in the NFL, because you're gonna get a lot more of this. This is, and that
was a pretty easy question.
It was an easy question, and in terms of yesterday, in the grand scheme of adversity that you're going to get as a head coach in the NFL, while yesterday felt like kind of a shit show out there, it's going to be a whole lot worse when you've lost 4 games in a row and you're teetering on playoff qualification, and you may have your second losing season in a row. Like, things are going to go bad when you're an NFL head coach, and you're going to have to deal with those things, and they're going to get a whole heck of a lot worse than a day of fighting at training camp and one of your players getting suspended for 6 games. That's
especially
kind of
as a head coach play caller, right? I mean, you think about that, is that you're a head coach play caller.
Yeah.
This is your offense. You are the one calling the plays.
Does he think people are going to be calling for his head from a coordinator standpoint? Because they're going to at some point.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, think about how many coaches have had to stand up and answer questions that are play callers and answer questions about bad play calling, bad plays that resulted in
the best
losses
play callers, Zach.
Like
even Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, the best dudes. We all agree, the best. And yet,
right,
12 weeks out of the year, they are getting shit on from Monday to Saturday for their play calling decisions.
Exactly.
So you're going to get it no matter how good you are.
Like, that's the thing is that it's actually for him probably going to be worse than what it is for maybe Vrabel. Yeah. Vrabel made his own messy bed. Like the way that he interacted with the media after losses and sometimes even worse after wins. The way he interacted was worse. This is not. And for fans, let me just say this. For fans who say this is no big deal, you're the same fans who said it was no big deal for Vrabel and it turned into a big deal for you at the end of Vrabel. And I get there's a long way to go with Callahan before we realize who the real Callahan press conference guy head coach is. Mm-hmm. But he has a lot more pressure on him than Vrabel does because he is a play caller as well as head coach. This is his offense as well as head coach. At least Vrabel had, Art Smith designing the play calls and stuff like that. At least he had other people doing stuff. This is his baby. And when it's run, pass, and we're wondering why, and I'm not saying it is, but let's say if it is run, pass, and you guys are complaining about run, pass, it's Brian Callahan's fault. It's not Nick Holtz's fault. So we all have to understand that the shift of the blame is going to be on him. And if he's already pee-peeing his pants a little bit over a question about timing,
right,
that's not a good thing. And listen, again, I'll grant him some grace. It was hot as fuck on Tuesday.
Yes.
And let me say this. He had fights. And while he was on there, he had Jeffery Simmons going outside and doing stuff. Of course, that doesn't really play into
I'm
this.
sitting here trying to think of the timeline of when the Jeffery Simmons. I think the Jeffery Simmons thing was actively happening during this question.
Yes.
So he may have been looking past me, seeing this in the background. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm with you in the sense that it may just be a one-off thing, and he was upset, which is fine.
Well, and his offense has not been performing well as well. But we got a little insight from Will Levis saying that, well, this is the first today, Wednesday, was the first day that the defense didn't have the script. So I mean, the defense had a little bit of an edge.
Yeah.
But his offense is not performing, and maybe certain players aren't progressing. And then he's getting questions about that after coming out of the heat, after there was a huge fight. He's still a rookie head coach that hasn't dealt with the press a lot and all this stuff.
And it was one
sentence, I'm willing to give him some grace. It was one sentence.
It's a small little thing. But it's concerning.
Turn into a bigger thing. Like it's something to take of note. And I agree with that. And it's something that was on its face a little ridiculous now that you put in the context of how he has particularly been covered since joining the Tennessee Titans. Now I get where you're coming from.
Right. That's the biggest thing is that if
the biggest thing. That's
if the entire, like, let's take the Jaguars, for example, like transplant the Jaguars offseason, their free agency, their draft, so far what's happened in training camp, transplant that onto the Titans. If that has been what's happened, and then he said that yesterday, I wouldn't be, I still think it's kind of like a soft mentality, but I'd get it at least because it's like, well, yeah, it's kind of been a negative offseason. The fact that it has been the rosiest possible offseason for them, and for one bad day to happen and for him to say that, again, maybe it's an offhand comment, but what I'm simply worried that is a window into Brian Callahan's soul insofar as the way that he thinks about the way that his team is covered. And
we'll see if it actually is. I mean, that's the thing. We're speculating or projecting a worst case scenario.
Yes.
Not telling you that this is factually what's going to happen. I think
we'll know whether that's the case or not when he's doing his presser on his third consecutive loss at some point in his career, probably this year. Like there's going to be the offensive line allowed 8 sacks today. And if then he's like really going, not just in an offhand comment, but going on a diatribe about how he thinks that
we can point to that as evidence
fairly, and like so much negativity around here. And well, you guys aren't even talking about the fact that Tyjae Spears had a 72-yard touchdown run today. Like if that's the thing, and I'm not saying that's going to be the thing, I'm just a little bit worried it might be based on that comment. Then that's not good. But again, to be 100% fair to Brian Callahan, everything else he said besides that one comment has inspired faith in me and the way that he handles the media. I mean, to let people behind the curtain, I don't know if we're allowed to say this, but I think so. On Saturday, which is the next Titans practice, we're doing something that we didn't really do with Mike Vrabel, where before practice, Callahan's going to be available to the media, but it's not going to be at the podium with cameras. It's a no camera zone. We can quote him and we can do audio recordings, but it's just going to be Basically, the media just he wants it to be a conversational thing where we're just talking with him, and that has been.
That should instill you with a little bit more confidence about the situation. But again, there is something to be said about leadership and handling yourself out in public.
Well, you mentioned he's not the only coach that said some dumb things. So what were the other dumb things that were said?
Well, Denard Wilson, and we got 10 minutes left. Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville, fantastic award-winning liquor store. Go to Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville. They totally revamped their parking lot, made it easier for you to get in there, in and out. Liquor, wine, CBD drinks. Can I say CBD drinks? Braden made a big deal that you can't say it. I don't know why, but I don't know. Whether you can he's on that Pod Bless Nashville. I don't know if there's has something with politics or whatever, but hey, go get high off some CBD oil drinks over at Sinkers Beverages. Denard Wilson, who may be drinking some CBD beverages, has said the first eyebrow-raising thing of his tenure here.
Yep.
And it was in reference to the Arden Key suspension. And he was asked, what's next for that position? He goes, well, we have the right guys in the building to step up and take over that spot. And I get it. That is probably coach speak and not the real plan.
Zach,
probably. I hope it is. I hope it is.
If you think that's not
listen, we have learned from Vrabel that sometimes next man up is the actual plan, regardless of actual available assets to them to change that plan.
Right.
So I'm going to say probably.
I think it's
and I'll agree.
Denard Wilson's intelligence to assume that that's not coach speak.
It's likely. But I think that was a ridiculous thing to say when you could have provided a different form of coach speak saying, well, we're going to have to figure out this position because it just happened yesterday. And we're going to have to figure out what we're going to go from here. We'll see who steps up in camp, but I'm sure we're going to look out in the waiver wire. Like it's such an easy thing to say, but putting your full effort and support, whether it's a lie or not, or a fib or an exaggeration, however you want to phrase it, is behind Shane Ray, who hasn't played a snap in the NFL since 2018. Jalen Harrell, who is a rookie in the 7th round. Rashad Weaver, who has done relatively nothing to give you that kind of faith. Tommy Rush, who is just another dude. And Caleb Murphy, who everybody thought was the next coming of Cameron Wake last year, who ended up being nothing. Yeah. Even though he was on the 53-man roster the entire year, which was insane to me. To put your faith in those guys is very scary, regardless of if you truly believe that comment. Now you've instilled faith because there have been days where Shane Ray has looked good and people in the media, I don't know if you have, but some people in the media have kind of extolled how good Shane Ray looks. And when you just say player looks good, let me just say it. You guys aren't saying that he's great, but when you guys say that a player is good, fans take it to the extreme and like, well, Shane Ray's great. He's going to get 10 sacks this season because he had a couple of good plays in training camp. Mm-hmm. And at this point, they have to go sign someone. And Carl Lawson, as of this taping, which is Wednesday night, Carl Lawson is going to have a workout with the Dallas Cowboys, where Mike Zimmer was his former defensive coordinator. So there is a connection there. The Tennessee Titans, from what I have heard, have not had interest as of this recording and reached out to Marcus Golden. So it's kind of like, are you just going to let it all pass away when there's probably easy pieces to add that can at least sustain you for 6 weeks?
Yeah.
So where do you rank that on the silly meter? Maybe not stupid, but it's the silliest thing that you could probably say.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite in terms of seriousness to me. From we just spent 20 minutes talking about Brian Callahan's comment and how that I think there's actually there's a concerning level of weight that may or may not be involved there. With this comment, it is so supremely outraged. I mean, it is Joe Biden at a rally going, "Let me say this as clearly as I can. I'm running. And we're like, okay, Joe, sure. And then he drops out 7 seconds later. Like that it's just such an obvious lie that you have to tell until it's no longer true. It's Nick Saban at Miami saying, I'm not interested in the Alabama coaching job and on Monday Night Football. And then by Wednesday, he's the head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. It's something everyone expects you to have to say. I get it, but everyone knows you're lying. And we all just feel silly because the fact that there has to be this charade in the first place is a funny thing. That being said, in the case of, because when you first started talking about this, I'm kind of just laughing it off and not concerned at all. And I'm like, I think he's lying. I think they're going to look at somebody. But then when you sit there and talk about how here's the options, they don't seem interested in the options. I'm not sure who they plan. Like, what if they're serious about the guys on this roster? And if so, here are the guys. And so that
they're serious about Jack Gibbons.
Exactly. So that's it's a hill. Of all the hills to die on, that sure is one of them. It's a strong flag plant on his part. If that is the case, that he is truly believing that they have a guy, you know what? If you want to shut up the media, do that and then be right about that, because that will be something that we're all.
Hey, it may work with Kenneth Murray.
Well, and that's kind of where I was going, is that, he has had unwavering faith in Kenneth Murray since the Titans signed him. He said nothing but positive things about Kenneth Murray. And as I tweeted today, so far, and again, it is still July, so far, Kenneth Murray has done nothing out at practice besides positive things to my eye and to JT's eye and to anybody else I've talked about. Like, have you noticed Kenneth Murray do something where you're like, oh, there's Kenneth Murray, there's the concern? And the answer is no, not really. But I have seen him make a couple of impressive plays. And it's just the idea, and again, it's still July, but the idea of Kenneth Murray being really good for this team is hilarious on its face, because there isn't a soul in media and very, very, very few fans, no fans that were rational, who were a huge fan of that decision. It was largely a head scratcher. It certainly wasn't a decision where everybody's like, well, okay, well, check off the linebacker need box. We got that need is filled. That was not a need filler of a decision to bring him in. And yet, if he does fill that need and is good for this team, we'll all be batting triple zeros on K9 takes. If he
maybe we're going to bat triple zeros on the 6 weeks of a platoon edge.
And that's my point, is that if they're right on both fronts, it's going to be hard to challenge anything that Denard Wilson says going forward. We'll all have to issue a mea culpa. I will personally find it very funny. That's the thing about folks in the media that take themselves too seriously that bother me. Whenever I say something critical, I'm not afraid to be honest and critical of somebody like Jeffery Simmons. I go, Jeffery Simmons, I'm not sure you can be a leader. The reason why I'm willing to say that with my chest is because ultimately I am hoping to be proven wrong. I want everyone to succeed. And so if I say out loud, you're not succeeding, or I don't think you can succeed, that is a subconscious way for me to I am charging you subconsciously. Prove me wrong. Make me eat my words. Make me come on the radio or on the internet or on Twitter and say, this makes me look very silly because this guy proved that I could not have been more wrong. I want to be wrong whenever I am critical. And so if we're wrong about there being a guy on this team that can take that mantle, more power to you, man. I don't think we're wrong about it. I don't. I didn't think that about Kenneth Murray, and we may still not be wrong because, again, it's still July, but I'm more confident in, even more than the Kenneth Murray questioning, I am more confident in saying, guys, they don't have a dude. They don't have the dude to do that. And if they do, it's one of those things where in hindsight, people point out like, well, you said this back then, so you were wrong. And you want to say, I get that. Technically, I was wrong. But ultimately, I stand by what I said because at the time, I wasn't wrong. And what I guess
you're proven wrong.
That, my point is that as of today, it's not an opinion they don't have that guy. It's a fact. Like, you go out there and you watch practice, they do not have that guy. And if a month from now they do have that guy, it's not because I was wrong at the moment today. It's because between now and then, some guy really changed, like dramatically, tangibly changed the way that they play and the level at which they play. And that's great. And that's development. And that's points to the coaching staff. But that doesn't mean that I'm wrong today on July 31st saying they don't have that guy. If they do have that guy on the roster, he's going to create himself from whole cloth in the next 4 or 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. So real quick, we gotta get to the offensive coordinator real quick, and you have no clue what I'm about to tell you as far
And
as
you know what, Zach?
topic-wise.
When you said this to me, I went back and listened to it because you
You're
said
gonna
I
have to
have.
put together 2 different press conferences. That's the key.
Okay.
See,
Okay.
I've kind of put together 2 different press conference
So I don't know what
comments.
Nick Holt said that was dumb, but apparently
Yeah.
there was something
So
stupid.
it's not really dumb or silly. So maybe this was a terrible way to phrase this whole topic.
Okay.
But I do think it was something maybe because really what Denard Wilson said was silly, not stupid. And really what Brian Callahan said was pretty stupid, I would say. Maybe not stupid is too harsh of a word, but
concerning.
Concerning. But I thought it was interesting that Nick Holt said something that conflicted completely with what Brian Callahan said a day before.
Okay.
On Tuesday, Brian Callahan was talking about figuring out when you are really going to know when the offensive line is the offensive line. Mm-hmm. He talked about it lasting, you probably wouldn't know till about week 1.
Right.
Nick Holt said, well, we should know in about a week or so.
Oh, did he really?
Okay. He did say that today.
I didn't pick up on that.
He said that we should know that, those 5, we should know in about a week or so who the starting 5 is. Which is completely different.
Who's lying?
And maybe maybe there was, because there was with Nick Holtz, there's a lot of word salad in between some stuff.
It is a word salad, yeah.
But he said, and I'm pretty damn certain that he said, in about a week or so is kind of how he framed it, like sooner than week 1. So I just thought it was interesting that there was conflicting messages, and maybe it is Nick Holtz not being on the same page, not Nick Holtz, spreading secrets or anything. Mm-hmm. But it feels like maybe Nick Holtz is not on the same page as Brian Callahan in regards to where this offensive line is at in its current iteration and where they expect it to be. Now, listen, NPF will be back probably by Friday.
I was about to say.
Maybe Nick Holtz is just thinking, yeah, we'll know because we're going to know that Nicholas Petit-Frere is just the guy that we
already know who the guard is. And we already know who the guard is. Yep.
But I did think that was like, I don't think anybody picked up on it, but I was like, Brian Callahan said like week 1 has been kind of talking preseason and stuff like that. His father has been echoing preseason as well. Nick Holtz is like, yeah, in about a week or so.
Zach, between the beginning of you explaining that to me and right now, I have already fashioned and put on my tinfoil hat. I think, because I asked you in the middle there, who do you think is lying? Is it Brian Callahan or is it Nick Holtz? Because I really don't think it's Nick Holtz is just not on the same page. Like, oh, he wasn't there for that meeting. They haven't talked about this. I find that hard to believe. I find it much more easy to believe that Nick Holtz just kind of let the truth slip a little bit. Where with Brian Callahan, he's being diplomatic. He's doing what he's supposed to do as head coach, being political and saying, we got a lot of guys contending for this position. Training camp is long. With injuries, you never know. Sometimes a guy can win a job and then they get injured and the job becomes open for competition again. Like, things change. We won't really know, technically speaking, who the starting 5 is until we get to the time to run out the starting 5 onto the field for the actual games. True, technically. But in reality, as Nick Holtz kind of elucidated there, we're going to know in about a week or so. And as you pointed out, NPF coming back in about a week. I can't say, I'm technically forbid from saying who is and isn't playing where and in what role, but I can tell you that there are reports out there as to who's playing with the first team, people breaking the rules. You can find them. And I can tell you that it has been this way since not just the beginning of training camp, but since back in the spring at the end of OTAs. This individual playing first team right guard has been doing that for a while now. It hasn't changed up. It's not been in a 1 day off, 1 day on kind of deal. It's been that guy. And so I think all of us in the media that are kind of forecasting the roles have gotten to a point where it's like, that guy's pretty much already got that spot locked down unless he gets hurt or somebody else really comes out and wows them in the next 3 weeks. And it's really up to the right tackle position. And as we talked about yesterday with JT on the Hot Read podcast, a guy like MPF, JT's contention, and I believe him here, is that by simply not being out there yesterday, and maybe today too, I've not talked to him yet today, MPF helped himself in the competition for right tackle by omission, because the guys vying in his stead for the position were quite bad. And so I think the Titans, if you gave them truth serum, if you gave it to Bill and Brian and Nick Holtz and anybody involved with the roster, they would tell you, we're pretty set on the 4 positions to the to the left side of the offensive line. We're really only still thinking about that right tackle spot. And the guy that we think is going to be the guy is not currently practicing with us. So we kind of need to confirm once he's back out there whether or not he's the guy, but we're pretty sure we know who the 5 are, and we're just waiting on that last little domino to fall. That's where I think that they're at.
Yeah, he said now, Nick Holt said expects the O-line will sort itself out during camp and believes answers on starters will be clear when it's time for season. But I am pretty sure he said like in a week or so, and maybe he corrected himself. So maybe your thought process is right, is that he kind of caught himself.
What are you reading that on the transcript? Where are you reading
So that? No, not on transcript. This is just from Jim White. Nobody had this. Not a lot of videos from Nick Holtz, by the way. The presser today. There is A to Z has one, Malik Willis and running backs, and is like only like 3 or 4 videos from the Nick Holtz presser total from the entire
presser,
media report.
The full presser is up on the Titans page, but it's the Titans have done this thing for a while now, and I don't know if fans have caught up on it. Like they broadcast it live on YouTube, and then as soon as it's over, they delete the live broadcast, and then they put up a state approved produced broadcast where it's okay, not all the time, but there have been occasions where they cut some of the fat, and some of the fat is the most interesting parts of the presser, and they give you what they want you to see in a video form. So I'd be curious to see if I go back and listen to the Nick Holtz state approved broadcast video on YouTube, whether or not that question and answer are actually in there, or if there's a sneaky little jump cut.
Yeah, it was very interesting. But I'm pretty sure he said something about a week or so. But
okay,
all that to say, I just thought that the messaging being a little bit tad different was very interesting. So that may be a stupid thing, but more interesting thing. I'll tell you what's not stupid was this show. I enjoyed it, Easton. We had a great show. Appreciate you coming on. Hot Read Podcast. What's your all schedule like now that the training camp's back up?
So we're still doing live on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. So when you're listening to this broadcast tomorrow, which, on Thursday of this week, the Hot Read Podcast will be live in just a couple of hours at 4 p.m. So tune into that. I don't know at this point when, what we're going to be talking about for sure, but it'll be interesting things, and it'll be different from what Zach and I just talked about. So tune in a couple of hours at 4 p.m. for the Hot Read Podcast with JT and I.
All right, that'll do it for us. Football and Other F-Words on Wednesdays, the football show Mondays and Thursdays, 440 Sports Network. Sinkers Beverages is our sponsor, great sponsor. Been rocking it in Nashville. They're over in East Nashville. Head over there, get your beer, liquor, wine, whatever you need, they got, and they will be able to help you find something you didn't even know that you wanted, didn't even know that you needed. That's how helpful they are. Sinkers Beverages in East Nashville, award-winning, multi-time award-winning. So they're fantastic. For Easton, I am Zach. This has been a football show, and we appreciate you hanging out with us.